Okay, so let's get started. This is the last slide or last presentation for today, and it is called Navajo Dietitian's Journey from Reservation to Entrepreneur. The reason why I didn't do a career map, because you're gonna visually watch my whole career map just to get an idea of where I'm coming from. Often I get asked about why I do what I do. And so this is my way of explaining why I do what I do. And also, I didn't actually meet a dietitian who identified as Native until 2 years after I got my bachelor's. So, of course, I mean, the only dietitian experience I had was when I was referred, when I talked about that scenario where person asked me how many teaspoons of jam I put on my toast as a 10-year-old. Um, that was my only experience with a dietitian. And I actually was absolutely convinced I wasn't going to be a dietitian. You'll find out why. But somehow I just ended up doing it. So let's get into it. There's that disclaimer again. Objectives is to outline the educational pathway required to become an RD if you're not familiar with it. Identify leadership skills and competencies needed for the success in the field of nutrition and dietetics, and then also just gain an expanded awareness of the different career paths that we can do. And along the way, you'll find out my story. So I'm going to weave all of these objectives into my story. All right, first thing, number one, we're really focused on career today, career mapping. So my question to you is, it's going to be a free text box, and you're going to answer, what is one lesson about professional growth you wish you had learned in your career? So just imagine little you. What would you tell little you when they're like, I'm going to do this? So... And hopefully, if we have any students hanging around too, from Fort Lewis, I definitely encourage you to read through all of that. So for the professionals in the room, this is also to hopefully nudge some of the students in the room about what they think about for professional growth. See you guys. Bye. All right, so we got like 10 people so far. I'm going to read this off just in case some of us aren't able to access it. Let me start from the bottom. Patience. So that one's spelled with a T, but maybe you meant a C, which I agree with. There is no rush, definitely. You don't have to know everything before you get started. Yes. And some of our panelists had mentioned that as well, is like we learn, we grow, we're all humans. Find a mentor, especially if you're a first generation college student. That definitely helped too. I would have loved to have a native dietitian mentor. Unfortunately, there wasn't any. But now, one of the things I do too is I offer opportunities for students to come and intern with me because it's just different. Be patient, it takes time. Enjoy the journey. You learn more from community and patience than you ever will from a book. Yes. You miss 100% of the shots if you don't take it. Yes. Don't be afraid of no. Just ask. Question your path and pay attention to your work and how work makes you feel. Make more connections and relationships outside of work in different orgs. Yes. The importance of connections you make and fostering those connections. It's so broad, so many opportunities. Yes. It takes time and can look different than you may have expected. You don't have to do everything all at once. You can come back to things. Yes. Follow your heart, follow your dreams, make your own way. Explore. There are many opportunities than usual taught in school. You just have to be open to finding them. That I didn't have to choose a career path right away. It took me 2 degrees until I realized what I wanted to do. I'm pretty sure you're much more well-rounded now after 2 degrees. Don't minimize the impact of your personal growth, and the growth never ends. Education is important. Treating others well is that much more salient. Be open to anything. Sometimes the best direction isn't the one you think. All right, so we'll stop there, but it sounds like there's a lot of people that have a lot of great knowledge. For our students, maybe for our past selves, and that's what I like to highlight when we're going through and learning about career paths. These career maps around us will definitely give us more insight into how we learned along the way. So thank you, everyone. If you are a student, I would highly recommend you screenshot these questions and post it up on your computer. Sometimes I have to still put affirmations on my own computer in my office. Like I have to print something out and write an affirmation down to remind myself. So these would all be really good things to write down and tape it on your computer. All right, so let's get into my story. So my story was very much this windy road. And that was me on the little bike. Just kidding. That's not really me. This is a stock photo, but I was like, yeah, that's me. I identify with that person. But it was very much very windy. And like I said, I didn't even know if I was going to become a dietitian. I was actually pretty convinced I didn't want to do dietetics. But eventually I found my way. Again, just a little bit about me, just so you know me, besides what I do as a dietitian. I said my clans this morning. These are my clans in English. So the translation is, I am the Charcoal Streak Division of the Red Running into Water clan. That's the first one. I am born from Maidishkijni, which is the Coyote Pass people clan. Chotachitni, somebody correct me, but this is maternal grandfather, right? And that's the Bitterwater clan. And then Kia'ani, which is my paternal grandfather, that is Towering House people clan. So that's who I am. That's how I identify. And then just some other non-dietitian-y things that I like to do. I like reading historical fiction. I like running. I can say I like to weave, but then I can also say, like, I'm still learning how to weave. Both my grandmothers were really amazing, just so talented weavers in the Navajo style. And I have a loom and I put yarn on it every now and then, but it is a very slow growing process. And that hobby actually was born out of the pandemic. I was like, maybe now's the time to learn how to weave. I knew how to crochet. My mom taught me when I was younger. I used to crochet in high school listening to lectures. So I was that weird kid. And then I also like to play ball with my dogs. I like to travel. I like to eat. Those are all the fun things I like to do. This picture here is, I went to Chiapas last year and I was really excited to have corn from that area and have like the corn that's being sold on like the markets in the town center. So I was like, take a picture of me eating corn. So I was very excited. So like I said, I didn't know I was going to be a dietitian when I graduated bachelor's with my bachelor's program in dietetics. So mainly because it was a lot of work and I was like, I don't know if I want to do that kind of work. Science, that sounds really hard. And for good reason. As dietitians, we are very, very highly educated when it comes to understanding nutrition. It's a science, it's an applied science. We have to learn a lot about OChem, biochem, all that good stuff. The word dietitian, registered dietitian, now it's also called registered dietitian nutritionist, but we call it dietitian for short. It's tightly regulated. Right now, you need a minimum master's level master's degree, which is something that's new as of last year. You have to go through a nationally accredited program like the one at Fort Lewis that we're getting there. We're getting to the accreditation, which I think I'm on the board of, right? Okay, that's I'm there. And after we do the program, after you get your master's, we are looking at getting 1,000 hours of supervised practice. So that's going to be clinical, community, and food service management. And then we also have to keep up with health equity and health equity training and ethics, because there's a lot of ethical considerations when we're talking about how we talk to patients about the way they decide to feed themselves. And then also required continuing education to maintain the credential. So every 5 years, we have to put in hours, this being one of them. Uh, Whereas the term nutritionist, we have a lot of social media nutritionists, and so we're always like at odds with them because anybody can call themselves a nutritionist. And often people who have undergone a certain medical condition or certain experience, they think that qualifies them as being a quote unquote nutritionist. And now they think they know everything about that whole condition. But that's just something to be aware of. People who call themselves nutritionists, just understand not regulated at all. Registered dietitian is. You can't just call yourself a dietitian without doing the work. There's no national accreditation for nutritionists. I've noticed there's a lot more online courses to become a quote unquote nutritionist or a holistic nutritionist. And it's very much just like general nutrition. I've looked at like the coursework just to see like, what are you guys doing over there? It's just super general, and a lot of it is focused on weight management. And then also these nutritionists, people that call themselves nutritionists, they can't reimburse in a clinical setting. So they can't bill for insurance services, CMS. There's no supervised practice requirements, no requirements for ethics or health equity training, and there's no continuing education requirements. So just things to keep in mind. I definitely have worked with many healthcare professionals in the past who didn't understand like what level of training we have when it comes to, being accredited. So the reason why I bring up dietitians, the training behind dietetics, is because I want to say, like, Marnie, correct me if I'm wrong, but like close to 80% of our field is white women. Is it like higher? I know like 91% is the white population, something like that. And that's, an issue. And I'm not saying like, we need to get reduce that level, but I'm also saying we need to increase the level of marginalized patients, because which communities are affected by chronic disease most? That's my question to you guys. People who are historically marginalized, people of color. And if we don't provide healthcare workers that identify more with those communities that we're serving, maybe it's, our information or our education won't be as impactful as it could be. And definitely I've met a lot of dietitians who work on the res who weren't from the community. I would essentially just call them Navajo at this point. And like they have definitely integrated a lot of concepts and beliefs about Native wellness, Navajo wellness into their education. But we really need to make sure that we're also trying to increase the level of dietitians who identify as Indigenous, because that can lead to improved patient care, reduce health disparities, enhance communication. It can help with improving problem solving and innovation. With recruitment and retention, like I said, I never give up an opportunity to talk with a Native student who's thinking about dietetics. I'm like, do it, please. And so that's where I want to, make sure we're also highlighting as well. And then also it helps with mental health, not just for us, but also our patients. Our patients feel a little bit more secure with somebody they have a little bit more in common with, who understands our story, our background, what's important to us. And so that's, where I'm very adamant about talking about why we need to increase more Indigenous dietitians. And especially with this master's program requirement, it's just yet another barrier that, we have to think about. But again, barriers means that we need to come up with solutions to those barriers. It's not enough to just say, oh, this is a barrier, but we need to find opportunities, create environments that get around those barriers. So little bit of background about me. Like I said, I'm from Chinle. That's me with the bow. um, and this was taken at Canyon du Chet. If you've been to Canyon du Chet, between 1990 and 2005, you passed by my house because my house was directly right by the mouth of the canyon. And that's where I grew up. So I would always like run away to the canyon when I needed space. Um, I uh, I grew up in a family of seven. I have four siblings, and my youngest sister has Down syndrome. So a lot of resources were being directed to her for good reason. And so it was a very crowded home. We had like 3 bedrooms, I think. So very crowded. So that's me in high school. Graduated from Chinle High. Went on to ASU, and I changed my major 4 times. And kind of stopped counting. And then I was just like, I'll just be undeclared at the end. And that's how I was for about a good year. But, all the majors that I did have were focused on nutrition. I think my first one was like food service management. The other one was nutrition communication. The other one was, I don't remember. So a general nutrition. There's one called general nutrition. And then finally I landed on dietetics because I was like, I looked at the coursework and I was like, oh, this kind of covers everything I'm interested in. Unfortunately, my advisor was like, are you sure you want to do this? Like he kept asking over and over again. And I'm like, yeah, I want to do this. I kind of think he was trying to imply like it involved a lot of studying and my grades weren't that great. My grades weren't shining at all. And so I did find community at ASU. Definitely tutoring helped. I crawled myself across that graduation with a GPA of 2.7. And if you know, to get accepted into an internship with a GPA of 2.7 is just not a possibility. It's like a pipe dream. And bare minimum is like 3.0. And if you're 3.0, it's like good luck to you. So 2.7, I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And I graduated in 2011 with a BS in nutrition. And that's when I was kind of forced to when graduation came, I was like, well, maybe I need to find a job. Because obviously I'm not going to go into the internship. I wasn't even interested at all. I was like, I don't want to do that work. So I got work experience. Lessons learned from ASU, some of my lessons are, if it's your passion, don't get discouraged. I knew I always wanted to talk about nutrition in some capacity. And so I was like, okay, well, let me just get some experience to help me kind of, settle on this a little bit more. Um, Definitely finding your community is important in college. Definitely creating boundaries as needed, especially when it comes to studying. I think that's one thing I was like, maybe you should have said no to doing all these different things. Um, and also understanding that grades are not a reflection of your self-worth. Like because I was a 2.7 didn't mean I'm a quote unquote bad person. It just means I had different challenges. I had different maybe learning. I didn't understand my learning style yet. And then also finding your story is important. Through college, I knew I wanted to talk about nutrition because personally, I needed to fulfill some answers that I needed for myself. And so some of that was part of the story. And that's where I like to talk about those values, that values worksheets that you guys had, that helps you get to some of your story. And then also ask for support. I didn't know there was as many resources as there were on a college campus until like my very last year. So from 2011 to 2016, this is the work experience that I did. I was a public health nutrition volunteer back on the reservation, affiliated with the IHS. I eventually got a job as what they call a diabetes health coach, and that's where I learned most of my diabetes education knowledge, diabetes management knowledge. They called us a health coach. Technically, we were like a health tech, but in reality, we were functioning more like a CDE at the time. So we were just, a health tech or a CDE without the pay. So that's essentially what it was. Um, and then I worked for Women, Infants, and Children, Navajo Nation, for the Navajo Nation. And I would go around to different sites because it's really hard to find somebody with a nutrition background who wants to work in tribal WIC. It's just really hard to find people. And so that position opened up, and that's what I did. So just some lessons learned after, during my experience, between kind of deciding on what I want to do. Indigenous perspectives and foods are important. Definitely when I was working at the hospital, Chinle Hospital, a lot of people had questions about their management and how different foods impacted their blood sugars, different indigenous or cultural foods impacted their blood sugars. And I didn't get training on that, like in school. I didn't, understand, all the different nuances between indigenous foods. Also understanding that medical care team is essential to holistic care. Like understanding that we're all a team, having that interdisciplinary communication is important. One of the things that I did in the hospital was advise doctors on how to manage medications. And which is surprising, right? Because they're doctors, but I'm like here saying like, oh, this fasting is this and that is that. And so we should adjust this with their medications. Like you don't get that kind of opportunity off the res, definitely. Back on the res, it's like, just free for all sometimes. Living health, and then again, understanding that living healthier is different for everyone. In school, they teach you evidence-based diets, Eurocentric, Mediterranean, DASH, plant-based. Back then, it wasn't called plant-based, it was called vegetarian. And it's always a different name, right? Now the trendy word is plant-based. But it's like during that experience, I was like, oh, everybody can achieve whatever they're going for, lower A1C levels in a different way. And so that's where I learned it. Next thing is improvising is important, especially when looking for experience, meaning that just be creative, ask. And a lot of the question or a lot of the answers on here is on the Slido poll is find a mentor. And that's very important. And there's people out there who are willing to give you knowledge. You just got to keep asking. Again, thinking about why is respecting patient autonomy important? And that's really where I learned like, oh, if people feel empowered over their condition, then that'll help them manage their lifestyle better. And that'll hopefully improve outcomes later on in life. And so patient autonomy was very key. And sometimes I did have to like argue with doctors because it's like, look, like this clearly is not working for this person. So we need to try another avenue that we got to find something else. And then also last thing is counseling, health counseling, nutrition counseling should be a collaborative experience. So a lot of this I learned in Chinle Hospital. I was there for like 3 years. And I learned a lot of this. And then I was like, hey, I think I should go back to school to be a dietitian. I don't know any dietitians who are from my community, so maybe I can be one of those people. And I was like, well, I already have the bachelor's degree. Maybe what I'll do is look at my transcript and see how I can retake some of those courses to get a higher grade. And not just like showing that I can get a higher grade, but obviously when you get a D in organic chemistry, there's things you missed, right? Like there's things you just didn't know. And so I was like, well, let me go back and see if I can do that. And at the time I was living in Denver, in Littleton. And so I ended up signing up at MSU Denver to retake some courses there and just find out what I missed back at ASU. So I took, what was it? Advanced Organic Chemistry, Advanced Human Nutrition 1 and 2, because by then it was like 5 years, and I'm like, I don't remember any of that stuff. Um, and so I was like, okay, if I'm going to show that I'm going to get into the internship, I need to show some additional ways that I can commit or I can succeed in this field. So I ended up signing up for New Mexico State University's online program, based out of Las Cruces, but it was 100% virtual. So at the same time I was doing the MSU Denver courses, I was also doing NMSU MPH coursework as well. And the focus was community health education, and it took me 3 years to finish, because again, I was working, I was doing some other stuff, and at the same time, I knew I couldn't automatically get into the program because of my grades. And so when I talked to the advisor there, they were like, oh, you should take some general MPH courses, get A's in them, A's or B's, to show that you can commit to a higher level of learning, of coursework. So I ended up getting a 4.0 with my MPH. And it was really fun to me because for me, I had a why. Right? For me, I had values, and I identified some of those values back then. And I was like, well, like what Brandon said, 90% of Native students, they want to go back to their community and help. And that was my why. So I graduated in 2017. And then in the last year, I applied to the dietetic and the internship, that's what we call it, in my last year. Hoping on a wing and a prayer that I would get in. And just some lessons learned from Masters of Public Health. You know, I learned a lot about, I don't know that yet. And in bachelor's, when I was going for my ASU degree, I used to think I was just dumb. And then that's why I didn't know things. But I learned that if you read it over and over again, eventually your brain will catch on, because our brain is, you know, we call it neuroplasticity now, but our brain is meant to learn, right? And nobody told me that. It was just like, oh, you just got bad grades. um, but it was like, no, you just read it over and over again. If you don't understand it, read it again, and then maybe write it in your own words. I got to the point where I was like, well, let me see if I can figure out how I can regurgitate this in my own way. So I made up songs for myself to understand concepts, and I started drawing things out, because remember, I think the theme of today too is like natives are visual learners. So I didn't really understand that at the time. That's what I was doing, but I was trying to lean into that. So I would draw like pictures, and I would draw like, you know, things happening in our body, based on pictures. Like a person in a house is like when they want to go to the store, like that's the transport of LDL and blah, 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 all of that. So that's how I had to put it in my brain to understand it. So again, thinking about, you know, our brains have the ability to adapt to difficult situation. Asking nutritional professionals is key to assisting. And again, that goes back to finding that mentor, appreciating your own timeline. Like, you know, I definitely wasn't the, you know, go get a bachelor's and then go into the internship and then you're a dietitian by 25. That wasn't me. By this time I was like 32, 33. And so appreciate your own timeline. And people had said that in their feedback, appreciate where you're at, and have gratitude for that. Enjoy it. It's not a race. And I learned from my master's that writing doesn't have to suck. And I'm still very averse to writing, which is why I don't do peer-reviewed journal, but I know I'm getting pushed in that path to like do peer-reviewed stuff. I have been published in the last year, but I don't like to talk about it because I'm just ashamed of my writing. So if you can find it out there, good on you. But also learn from criticism too. You know, there's a lot of feedback we can get, and we can kind of integrate it into our career paths. So that's my mom and dad. So I finally got into the internship, and I did rotations. So I didn't get into an internship where they hold your hand and say, look, this is where you go. Okay, bye. I I had to rough it, man. I got a distance internship, which means you are responsible for finding your own sites and talking with supervisors and coordinating everything. And all the internship, really their responsibility was just to sign off on things. They really didn't do any speaking on your behalf. You just had to find a site and tell the director or the internship program, I found a site, this is where you got to send all of the liability paperwork, and then these are my hours. So that was really roughing it. I don't know if they still have that option. Do they still have the option? Okay. And with the internship, you have to get clinical, food service, and community experience. The focus is on clinical. And so I did mine at actually San Juan Regional. I asked San Juan Regional if they needed any assistance. Of course they did. And also in Denver, there's a rehab center called Sloan's Lake that I did some stuff at. And it was fun. I was actually in a dementia unit too. So that's extra layers. So that was fun. Me and the dietitian would like sneak rolls into, grandpa's food and be like, you didn't eat your roll. What happened? And then he would eat it again because he would have a hard time eating. And then food service management, I did some stuff at Denver Public Schools, and then community. I wanted to stay more native centric. So I asked COPE. Many of us are familiar with COPE, which is based out of Gallup. And then I did some stuff at Denver Indian Health Center too, actually using Cooking Matters curriculum. So that's how I got some of my hours as well. Because Cooking Matters was trying to branch out into native centers. And so I kind of coordinated, I can teach our Cooking Matters classes and get internship hours as well. So I kind of made it work for me. So lessons learned from the internship. Again, I don't know that yet. Ask for support, seek out those mentors, appreciate your own timeline, use your experiences, and keep your notes from undergrad. That was my takeaway. I was like, how was it that this lipid thing happened? And what did my professor say about this condition and what labs to do? Thankfully, I kept my labs, but I had to ask my mom to pull it out of the garage. And I still use textbooks from my undergrad, but I actually ordered the updated editions. That's how important some of those textbooks were. I was like, oh, that is the most important resource to have. And so I got through the internship. I passed my exam. And I was shaking the whole time with the exam, like my hands were sweaty. And I don't know, I probably like blacked out half of it. I barely remember it. It is really difficult. But I would also say the CDCES exam was actually a little bit more harder than the RD exam. So that's saying something. So I ended up getting a job at Fort Defiance. Where I got all of my clinical dietetics experience from. And I was the outpatient dietitian, but I subbed in for inpatient when the inpatient dietitian needed to leave, go on leave. And yeah, that's kind of what I did. That was actually one of our pharmacists. She was in the community for a very long time, so she got a cute little outfit. I was like, oh, let me take a picture of you. That middle picture is actually a picture of a tube feed formula that was very, very hard to get to because at the time it was during the pandemic. And there were restrictions on tube feeds. There still is now. And we had a specific pediatric patient, infant, who required this very super ultra specialized formula. And we were able to get it and purchase it with our department money. So I was like, take a picture of me with this tube feed. So I was very proud of that moment. And then I was like 3 years into being a dietitian, a clinical dietitian. And for me, I've always identified as being a community nutrition. Like that's where all the fun happens for me. Like it's just so fun to go out to places and talk about stuff and develop games and all that good stuff. And so towards the end of me being at the hospital, I started to dabble in more community nutrition stuff. I did like radio, 2-hour radio shows on KTNN. um, and, uh, and so that was fun. My aunts and uncles would text me and be like, I hear you on the radio. And I would just like get a bunch of random nutrition questions and just start talking about it. And then that's Roy. He's one of the translators as well. Very beautiful voice. And so he would translate for me because like I said, I'm not fluent in Navajo. So we would do that too. So lessons learned. At the hospital, what I learned a lot was one person doesn't have all the solutions. And that's how I think about things in a hospital setting, a community setting. We all have different skills. We just need to figure out a way to make all these skills mesh. And most of the time, it's about building connection and relationships, right? And a lot of people said that on the Slido poll too. So oftentimes we just got to go visit somebody else's office and just drop in and be like, hey, how's your day? Here, I made you some cookies. And if you really want to focus in on a project and you need that buy-in from that particular person, you just got to do that. Offer food all the time. Okay, and so again, my thing was they're not on board yet. Like I mentioned, that malnutrition initiative we did at the hospital, everybody was like, why do we got to talk about malnutrition? We need to talk about diabetes. And I'm like, it's all related. And so it was a lot of connection building, relationship building. And finally it clicked for nurses. And that's when we just kind of took off. And so it's always like they are not on board yet. You just got to find a way to work with them. Again, talking about your voice is important. That's why I'm very adamant about talking about my story, because there may be other Native students who just have never heard this story before. And they may be feeling bad about their GPA too, like I did. And I'm like, I had a GPA 2.7. I was very ashamed for very many years about that. And then also lean on your experiences, but take time to understand other people's perspectives. Like I said, we're humans all living a human life and we all have different experiences. And so learning with curiosity is important. And then for me, it's always like figure out how to make it fun, right? And that's one of the values as well, is like, how do we make it fun? That's why I'm doing this now. So eventually I learned clinical dietetics, while fun, it's not as fun as doing something on a cornfield. And so I started my company in 2021. I needed a creative outlet, and clinical dietetics was that it was fun, but not as fun. And I would often get requests from tribal organizations asking to do this presentation, this cooking class, that. And I'm like, I have 10 patients a day. I don't have time for that. Like, I got to figure out grandma's oncology stuff and this person's medications. And, I don't have time to develop a presentation. It takes me 10 hours to do a presentation. Every single one of these presentations, 10 hours or more. And so I was like, hey, there's a gap here. So I created a side hustle. And so I talked with my supervisor and I said, hey, can I do 410s? And he was like, yeah, sure, whatever. That's how our boss was. And so I did 410s, and on the day off, and then on the weekends were when I did my tumbleweed nutrition stuff. And I said, this is how I'm going to get out of here. This is how I'm going to be a dietitian for my community that's not affiliated with a hospital. So, obviously I could have gone to a community nutrition department, which is what I tried to do, didn't work out. And I was like, I need to be a community dietitian. I don't want to work for WIC. I know what that's like. I don't want to be affiliated with a hospital. And so I'll do this in a different way. And those are great organizations, but for me, I just needed to listen to what was in my heart. And so that's what I did. Our first more community event was actually with Zach. We for Bitty Baby Foods, and we've grown our businesses at the same time, essentially. And it was actually them that convinced me to do a business. And so that's how way back we are. And I was like, nobody's going to want to do this or buy into it. And so we're like, well, let's do a cooking class. And we did a cooking class based on GoFundMe donations. And that was our first event. And so this is that first event. So now we get into my company. I found out, again, leaning on those values, that value system, what's important to me. I found that I needed guardrails. Otherwise, I would say yes to everything and have no mission, no endpoint. And so I set up this value system for a way for me to, again, create those boundaries. And so first thing for me is to honor food, specifically honor indigenous food, and also rebuild a healthy relationship to food. Second thing was to improve health, and talking about what does it mean to redefine health to our own community. That's why I talk about those other versions of health. What does it mean to eat healthy food? I don't know. What do you have access to? Also create change, restructure our thought process and the language we use about nutrition. Like I said, dietetics is very much like, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat that. And it's like, no, we can use empowering ways to help our patients. And so it's also about changing that structure, that thought process, our mentality towards nutrition. And then also supporting local, which is, again, this conference is supporting local. So anytime I get approached with a possible project, it has to meet these four things. And otherwise it doesn't. And I'll tell you, I've definitely declined some pretty lucrative deals because it didn't meet this. Some pretty big beverage companies, some pretty big food companies approached me. Different particular meat board council approached me. And I told them about my pillars and told them what was important to me, and then they just never got back to me. So I was like, well, that solves that problem. And I was trying to lead them into the direction of, what if you sponsor a cooking class based on your type of product, but on the reservation? But they just never got back to me. That would have been a yes. That would have been my yes, but they didn't. So long. Essential skill. So point is, I think things that I've learned is communication is important. Definitely number one thing if you're going to work with people. There's no such thing as over communicating. That's something I'm very adamant about, because nobody knows what your thought. We can't brain read, like we can't read each other's minds. Critical thinking. Is very important, like kind of, again, leading with curiosity. Looking back on the evidence too is pretty important, especially to nutrition. We can't just recommend based on vibes or based on anecdotes. And then finally, cultural competency is, how do we improve on these skills? I am still learning, even though I identify as Navajo woman, I still feel like there's a lot that I need to learn about Navajo food. There are many things that I don't know enough of. Those farmers that were on this panel, they have so much knowledge, and that's why I go to their farms and I volunteer with them, because I still don't know some of these traditional foodway practices. So career opportunities, almost there, but my question is to you guys, what is one word describing your feelings about your career now? So that first question I asked, like, what's your advice? And now, if you think about your career path right now, and I kind of see little snippets here and there, I'm curious about, what is one word about your career now that you feel? And it's okay to write in tired. So like, I was definitely feeling that at the end of my hospital. Okay. All right, so we got like 20 people. People said interesting, challenging, stagnant, compassion, unsure, ho-hum, stressful, purpose, inspired, interesting, excited, grateful. I think I read shaky, alluding to federal stuff. Happy, uh, transformation, uninspired. Yeah, and that's okay. Those are all valid feelings. Many of us feel that at many times in our career. One day we're like, yeah, let's get this project done. The next day is like, oh, I'm so bored. And that's okay, and we're humans, right? We're not meant to be perfect and have perfect emotions. I think what matters most is how do we act on that? How do we act on some of these emotions? Um, and so I do want to highlight, thank you for entering in stuff, everybody. But I do want to highlight too with dietitians, um, for me, like I said, I always identify it as a community nutrition. I knew eventually I was going to end up in that field, whether it be with a department or somewhere else. But there's so many other opportunities for dietitians. Um, these are just examples. So we have like research and teaching, specialists, public health, schools and institutions, private practice, entrepreneurs and brand work, policy, legislation, and then clinical. Oftentimes, not often, like 100% of the time, if you want to be a dietitian on the reservation, your only choice is to work at a hospital. There's no other opportunities. And I knew I always wanted to, give back to my community and offer up my knowledge. But I had to figure that way out. So for me, I sometimes feel like I'm all of these things. And that's where I like it to be. Some dietitians are like, I just want to do research. That's cool. And again, understanding we all have different skills, just how do we work together with these skills? But I can legitimately say I'm in every single one of these in these specialties, for better or worse. I end up landing in it. So when we talk about continuing education with dietitians, like some things, if you're a dietitian, or maybe if you're a nurse or other healthcare professional, highly recommend, look into motivational interviewing, maybe become a certified diabetes care and education specialist. But I would also, I think number one thing is also learn trauma-informed care. With the field of dietetics, there's probably one other organization that talks about trauma-informed care in a more formalized way. That's like Leah's Pantry. Leah's Pantry has trauma-informed care. That's actually where I learned a lot of that stuff. But again, really isn't any Indigenous people in that organization, so I had to kind of like improvise. So yeah, just I forgot. I know I'm not supposed to have labels, sorry, or logos, but nobody look at this. Nothing's being advertised. But these are just some resources that I like to do. I like to follow social media accounts of dietitians. So anyway, conclusion, these are some of the takeaways hopefully you gathered. There's many ways to becoming a dietitian. Everyone's on their own journey. Your experience and voice is valuable. There are many opportunities for dietitians. If you don't see an opportunity out there, make one. Being in the healthcare field means being dedicated to learning. Like I said, nutrition's always evolving. There's always new stuff coming out. And then ultimately, like understanding that food is connection. Food is what brings us together. So as a nutrition health professional, we have a very powerful role in bringing people together. So that's it. Yeah. Okay, I made it. This one was in time.
All right. If you have it in you, if anybody has any questions in Zoom land, do we have some Zoomy questions? All right.
If you're willing to share, what would you say sparked your interest in nutrition initially? Were you exposed to any dietitians as a child, like with WIC or otherwise? Or did you witness any of your family members struggle with diabetes?
I didn't even talk about that, huh? Well, besides that one dietitian interaction I had when I was 10 years old, and I was like, well, that is one way not to be a healthcare professional. And I was like, let me just steer away from that. That was my inspiration. Um, and then the other thing was, you know, I actually, I think I said I wanted to be a comedian. But I was more focused on actually going to culinary school more so than being a comedian. But culinary school, I actually was ready. I toured the facility in Scottsdale. I was ready to do it. I just really enjoyed cooking for my family, making up recipes. I usually took over, you know, making dinner in high school. And so I just really like, you know, creating food. And I found out how expensive it was to do culinary training. And like I said, my family, you know, they were definitely poverty level. And I was like, well, I don't want to put that obligation on my family. And at the time, it costed $40,000 to get an associate's. An associate's. That was back then. That was like 15 years ago. So I'm sure it's even more crazy. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that to my family. I don't want to make them feel obligated. I know they would say like, you know, it's fine, but just on me. So at the time, I still applied to ASU, because that's what we did in high school. Um, and, uh, and I got accepted, and at the very last moment, when the culinary school sent me the paperwork to sign for the loan, I was like, nope, not doing it. I ghosted them. I was like, I'm not doing it. So I just can't. And I ended up going to ASU. And then it was in ASU where I like read a few articles about how like the vitamin C in pineapple can change like the structures in our cells. And I was like, that's cool. And so that's kind of my backstory, into what got me into dietetics. And that's, you know, some of the reason why I also do cooking classes too. Because I like cooking. I like creating recipes. Yeah.
If I turn the microphone on, we have an in-audience question. We have two. We'll go here.
Yeah, I was wondering if when you were still working at Fort Defiance and starting your business, was there, I guess, was there a lot, were you nervous making that jump from having like a stable income to doing your own thing? And did you, I guess when you made that jump, did you feel comfortable that you had found it could be a viable way to like still make a living too? I mean, the business sounds amazing, but was there that nervousness?
Definitely. I think so I left my job December 2022. I put in my 2 weeks notice saying I was gonna resign December 27. I think that was like a Friday. And I was like, this is your Christmas present, Danae. That was my Christmas present that year. And the whole year after that, I was just scared. And I was like that whole first year, I feel like I was on a roller coaster and my like just white knuckling it. And always in the back of my mind was like, if this doesn't work out, you'll have to go back to work for a hospital. And that's kind of what propelled me forward, was like, I have to make this work out. I do not want to chart. And just the reality, okay? I just don't like charting. Like I said, I don't like writing, and charting is writing. And that's kind of what I just kept holding on to in the back of my mind, that I have to make this out, make this work. Otherwise, what's the other option? Other option, I don't want to chart. So that whole first year, it was really slow going, because it's really, this is another thing about being a dietitian on the res, is that people tend to take you for granted. They tend to take your work for granted, your education for granted, and they expect you to do things for free. And for me, and for good reason, you know, IHS, they think dietitians, IHS, oh, just ask a dietitian to come out. They'll they'll do their dietitian thing and then go back to the hospital. We don't have to pay them anything. Whereas me, I'm proposing you pay me to do a service. You pay me to host a cooking class. You pay me to do a presentation. You pay me. It just kind of blew people's minds. Like I've had instances with tribal government saying like, I thought this was for your community. And I'm like, yeah, it is, but I can't pay bills based on, thoughts and vibes. Like I need to, be sure I can make this, living sustainable. And so that first year, a lot of it was that education was like, yeah, I want to do this for community, but I do need to get paid out of this. And there were often times where I would say yes. And in the beginning, I said yes to projects where I didn't get paid. That's where, before I left the hospital, I saved a ton. I maxed out my 401k, my retirement, and then I started investing in the stock market, which was a new thing to me. I saved up like around $10,000, knowing that I am going to not work at a hospital anymore. And thankfully, like my husband has health insurance. So I was like, well, just add me on to that. I'll help you pay that extra stuff for that. So I kind of set myself up in a way so that I felt like I had like a little bit of padding. So I wouldn't have to worry so much about that. So yeah, the first year was pretty tough. And then the second year happened. And when I was out on my own, by that time, I think it was the third year of having the business, and then it just started exploding. And now I'm at a point where I'm hiring contractors to do stuff for me. Exciting times. I host interns to help me with materials. And so it was really difficult, but it can happen. So.
Did I turn it off? Oh, no, it's on.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. It just like totally flew out of my brain with the microphone. But I'll think of it. Oh, yes. Okay, here it is. So as a diabetic educator, do you ever get in this situation where you're counseling someone who's eating, like you said, a heavy dinner, most of their food at dinner time? Like, is it ever where you feel like you need to work them or try to have them spread out their intakes throughout the day, or do you just like go with that plan? I don't know if I'm making any sense there, but
Yeah. I would ask permission to educate on how our blood sugar levels are affected by big meals. I can talk about the quality of those meals. Is there any fiber in there? Is there any protein? I would talk about testing their blood sugars in the morning, like fasting, and seeing what a bigger meal does to their blood sugars versus a smaller meal. Yeah, and again, going back to if you want to say like the reason why your fastings are really high, it's because you're having a big dinner. You wouldn't be that outright, but you could say like, hey, is it okay if we talk about meal patterns? Maybe talk about the roller coaster effect. Again, going back to stories, I like to draw roller coasters. Sometimes I like to do this is like a little bit more techie, but the XY graph where it's like, okay, pretend this is you in the morning with you wake up with 100 for your blood sugar. Let's say you have breakfast. What did you have for breakfast yesterday? Oatmeal, eggs, toast. Okay, you get a little bit of bump. Your insulin kicks in, helps you bring it down. Okay, what did you have for lunch? A sandwich and some chips. What did that do? Okay, what did you have for dinner? And then I say like we want kind of up and downs throughout the days. And then I contrast that with another graph and I say, let's pretend you just had one dinner. So you wake up with 100. You don't have breakfast, it goes down. You don't have lunch, it goes down. You finally get to dinner, you have a low blood sugar, you want to eat everything in the world, and you do. And then now you spike up, you get up to 300. And so when you do things like in that graph form too, that kind of helps too. And I say like, we don't want to be a roller coaster with a really high and a really low. And that's what's going to happen if we have a bigger dinner. And so I like to use like visuals for that. And just to kind of explain that a little bit so that they know like during the day, yes, it's supposed to rise. I think these days in social media, everybody thinks like a glucose spike is bad. And I'm like, that's what our human body does.
Yeah,
So
everyone's blood sugar goes up.
yeah, like that's a normal thing. We want that to happen. It's just people who have diabetes, we got to stay within these certain parameters. And that's what the insulin helps us do. That's what taking walks after meals does. That's what looking at the quality of our food helps us do. So we don't have those blood sugar spikes. So I tend to use pictures a lot. And
That's
again,
helpful,
asking
yeah.
permission to educate.
The context of the question too is more like, after you had talked about that earlier, I got to thinking like, wow, like maybe the way that I'm telling them to spread out their food or add a breakfast or whatever, like could be perceived as just another way that I'm telling people what to eat and
Yeah.
and I
Yeah,
was
and
like,
ask,
oh,
is
great.
that a priority to you?
Yeah.
Like, what's a priority to you? Do you actually want to start incorporating breakfast and lunches? Is there a lower fruit to pick off of the tree? Like, what do they call it? Picking the lowest fruit? Low hanging fruit, yeah. And so maybe that isn't their priority, and that's okay. We can try something else. And yeah, just being okay with that. Again, like we're going to talk about this tomorrow at the behavior change webinar, our presentation about the writing reflex. But instead of just throwing out all of this nutrition information, which is I'm pretty sure helpful, comes from a good place, but if there's a mismatch in stage of change, then it's not going to go very well. So if we're just saying like, oh, that's your problem, you're just eating too much at dinner time, it's not going to rub the same way as if it's like, well, what's your priority with nutrition? And then so just kind of taking it a different way. Eventually you're going to get to that goal of like talking about meal pattern management, but maybe it's just we need to get around it through a different way. So other questions? Yes.
Danae, thank you so much for today. I had a similar journey in becoming an RD. I love your content. As someone who's interested in starting an RD-gram, do you have any advice to overcome all the misinformations and the haters?
Right now, it's a very trying moment with a certain person, head of HHS, because that's where a lot of misinformation comes out. But sometimes we can get overwhelmed with that. But again, it's just like take it day by day. How do I make this content in a digestible way? Because on Instagram, it's very much, if you don't capture them within the first 2 seconds, it's gone. So again, going back to the how do we make messages sticky? And on Instagram, it's like higher pressure to like get that hook to 2 seconds into content. So sometimes for me, like remember how I said I was interested in nutrition communication? I learned some of that stuff from that major when I was that major for a semester. And so like just understanding communication styles, learning how to make those messages intriguing. There's certain words and certain things people do to suck you into content. And so now we got to ask, how do we suck people in using those tactics, but making sure that we aren't abusing that system or over promising. And that's the tricky part for us as RDs, because we have those ethical considerations. We can't just go out and say like, these 5 foods will cure your Alzheimer's, because that's not ethical, right? We don't know that. And so it is definitely a little harder, but that's where we need more dietitians to have more social media accounts too, because I think there was a study about like 80 or 90% of the American general public gets their information from social media, social nutrition information from social media. And so as healthcare professionals and public health professionals, how do we capitalize on that, or how do we dig into that more and spread the good word of nourishing foods?